In my mind, Flexbox is easily the best thing to happen to CSS. It takes all of those weird quirks, those things where they're weirdly difficult to solve even though they're basic things. Something as simple as, I want this to go directly in the center of a box. Well, it kind of gets weird, right? You have to refer to line height, but then if you have more than one tag or line, that doesn't work. So you resort to display table, and then you would think vertical align would work, but no, that doesn't work in that case. It just gets confusing really fast for something so simple. But with Flexbox, it's a cinch. Let me show you. I'll give you a crash course real quick. Let's say we have hello world here, and all we want to do, like I said, is put this perfectly in the center. Okay, let's go to our CSS, and we can say body, let's do some setup, background green, color is white, and then because we don't really have a site here, we need to do that thing where we set the body and the HTML to a height of 100%. So this would be good for like a splash page. Okay, so now we want this centered. So do you start with this, text align center, and then do you try to do the line height? Do we do 100% or do we do 500 pixels? Do we try to cheat or do we do display table? No, we just use Flexbox. Display, flex, align, items to the center, justify, content to the center. And we're done, believe it or not. So check it out. Let's clear these out. And yep, perfectly centered on the page. And if we were to make this bigger, H1, font size is 100 pixels. Yep, perfectly centered on the page. Okay, but what exactly did we do there? Okay, well, the first thing, if we want to use Flexbox on an element, we say display flex. Next, align items. What does this do? Well, of course, we can just try it out. If we remove it, it bumps up. If we add it, it goes down. Now, if you check the definition, it's kind of confusing. What it says is something along the lines of, it defines how things are aligned along the cross axis. So yeah, what does that mean? Well, by default, the axis will just be horizontal, left to right. So when we say align items, that means how are things aligned on the cross axis. So that would be top to bottom. So let me show you. Let's bring this down. And if I were to say align items flex start, you'll see they're at the very top, right? That makes sense. On the cross axis, which is top to bottom, I want it at the top. Well, we can also change this to flex end, and it'll place it at the bottom. So notice the huge amount of control you have at this point. You're not having to deal with like absolute positioning or left and right values. You have tons of control here if you just take some time to learn the properties. Okay, but let's bring that back to center. So essentially, by default, that's vertically centered is what we're saying. But we can change the default direction if we want to, and we'll do that later. Okay, so if this is the cross axis, justify content is the main axis, so left to right. So we're saying here, justify to the center. How do we want to align things? So if I were to change this to, once again, flex start, we're on the left, and flex end will be the opposite, toward the right. And of course, there's a few other values you might use, but this will get you started. Okay, let's do another one. What about how about that navigation scenario? We've all dealt with this likely. So let's say you have some links here. Let me do some real quick. Home. And let's just do 4. So we'll have about, mission statement, and contact. All right, so our goal is to place these in line and have them take up equal widths of the container. So for example, if we bring this up, we'll say nav, or do UL. We'll say the background is going to be green once again. And now how would we go about aligning these links? Well, you do stuff like this, right? You say display inline, and then you say margin right, and you just sort of try to get it to work, right? But notice they're not taking up equal amounts of space here, right? So then you think, well, maybe I can just say width is 25%, and then let's zero out any margin or padding here. Okay, so now I could set a background color of yellow, but now that won't work because we have display inline. So we can say inline block, and yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm just trying to display these and I can't even figure out how to do it. Once again, Flexbox to the rescue. So we'll get rid of this entirely, none of this stuff here at all. Instead, I will say display flex. Okay, so notice when we say display flex, everything immediately aligns according to the defaults, like we just talked about. So now let's do this. Let's turn off the bullets here. So we have them aligned, but we aren't yet taking up the right amount of space. We want each of these list items to be flexible enough to take up as much space as possible so that we ultimately take up the full width. Okay, well check this out. Flex, 1, done. It's literally that simple. And here's the best part. Let's say you add more, so you add 4 more. Okay, well we don't have much space here, but if we were to stretch this out, they will automatically adjust in order to take up the full amount of space. This is something with regular CSS that was actually very difficult to accomplish. Now, it literally took 2 properties and you're done. And things like this will work just fine. No weird spacing or alignment issues. It just works naturally. And then, of course, you could say text align center if you want to. And you have a perfectly aligned navigation menu. So potentially dozens of lines of CSS reduced to 2. Now, the way Flex 1 works here is it's actually a grouping of multiple properties, just like font is a grouping of font family and font size and things of that nature. And we haven't gone over some of those other properties just yet. But in general, just think we want each list item to be flexible to take up the proper amount of space. Now, when we say 1, they will all be equal. But if we were to say something like this, li, let's grab the very first one, and I'll say flex 2. Okay, well notice now that's taking up a little more space here, as you can see. And if I change that to 3, yeah, you see how they all automatically adjust. What I'm saying here is I want this list item here to take up 4 times more space than all of the other ones here. That's the way that works. But in this case, they're all equal, so they get the same width. All right, let's do another example. How about the common media object that you should be using in your projects? So let's say we want a div with a class of media. Next, we need a section for the thumbnail, right? So we could say, well, let's have another div with a class of media figure. And then finally, one with media body. This is standard syntax for a media object. So here we'll say within a paragraph tag, just add some lorem text and clean this up. Next, for the figure, I'm just going to paste in a hard-coded link to a gravatar image. All right, so yeah, that's the basic shape of a media object if you're not familiar. This is basically a simple component that you'll find is repeated throughout your entire site. So you'll have multiple areas of your site where you have like some kind of image off to the left, and then to the right is some companion text. So you see this for every Facebook thread or a comment or an aside or little block quotes. This gets repeated everywhere. So you can save yourself a lot of writing by creating a media component, and then you only need to add that class when you want this section of your site to take that shape. All right, so once again, with traditional CSS, well, yeah, you'd like float the image to the left, right? So you do something like this, float to the left, and yeah, that might be okay. You could add some margin right of 10 pixels or what have you. But yeah, then once you do something like this, maybe you have another paragraph. Well, yeah, we have that trap, and we've all hit it, where it's like, crap, this went onto the other line. How do I do this? Do I then do something weird where I say margin left is equal to the width of that? And then I'm not sure what it is, so I'm just going to keep going up. You've done this, and you know you have, right? This is just kind of a crappy way to do it. It's an old school way to do it. Once again, with Flexbox, it's so much easier, folks. We will say media, display, flex. Yeah, it just instantly works. Once again, due to that default alignment, which I will show you at the very end. Okay, so now I could say media figure will be margin right of 10 pixels or 1em or whatever you want. Next, why don't we line up the body? And let's hide the HTML. We could then say background is white, padding is 20 pixels, and yeah, instant media object, and it required, in this case, 1 line of relevant CSS. So if we were to comment that out, yep, and display flex, done. And by the way, did you notice how it no longer wraps down? So if we were to duplicate all of this, yeah, it's not going to wrap down because we're not using floats anymore. So that's no longer an issue. And if you think about it, floats have always been sort of hacky. It's just the way we all did it to make it work. But yeah, it doesn't really make sense, does it? So it's nice that in lots of situations, we can get away from it completely. Okay, let's finish up with one more example. And I'll show you flex direction because this can be a little confusing. All right, let's set up a div with a class of box. It'll say my box, and we'll take 3 of them. Okay, next I'm going to say background red, and let's set a width and a height on each of these. And then let's see, margin bottom is 1em. All right, so basic stuff. I'm going to hide the HTML since it's very simple. And well, let's do a few things. First, let's put my box directly in the center, like we learned at the beginning. Easy enough. Display flex. And now, like we did before, align items to the center and justify content to the center as well. Okay, perfectly centered on the page. But now I want these boxes to be horizontal rather than as a column. Well, yeah, we could do the old school thing where we say float left and margin right, and that'll get it to work. But yeah, if you've used floats for any period of time, you know that they're very brittle. Even a pixel difference in width, if you do your calculation wrong, can totally screw up your layout. It's just not ideal. Okay, well, remember how in the last example with the media object, we just added display flex and everything aligned horizontally by default? Okay, well, let's try that. Now, we could apply this styling to the body, but in real life, you might have a container or something along those lines. Just some kind of wrapper for your content. Okay, well now I'm going to say container display flex. So now we have two different instances of display flex, which is fine. And immediately we see these bump up. All right, so now we can add our margin right of 1em, and we're not using floats anymore. And also notice that because we're using flexible layouts here, everything will automatically adjust accordingly to fill up the space. And of course, in the situations where you don't want to do that, there's ways around that as well. But yeah, take a look at that. And then once again, we could say box first child if we want this guy in the middle, or why don't we change that? Let's go nth child 2. If we want him to take up more space, we could say flex 2. And then we say to the other boxes to do flex of 1. All right, well now this guy in the middle will take up twice as much space as the ones on the left and the right. Or if we want 3 times as much space. You get the idea. All right, now one final thing. Take a look at this. If we set flex direction, well by default it's set to row, which is basically left to right. And think of this as the way that we define the core main axis. So remember, by default, left to right is the main axis. So align items would be how things align along the cross axis, so top to bottom. But we can swap that out if we want to. So if we were to change this to column, well now the default alignment is top to bottom. But here's one of the coolest things. If I bring this back, let's say my box 1, 2, and 3. We can change the order of these very, very easily. So for example, if I were to say column reverse, it will reverse the order of the items so that you see the last one first. And the same, by the way, would be true for, so we have row, but then row reverse would swap those so that we see the last one first. All right, well, clearly there's so much more to cover, but hopefully this will whet your appetite and you'll dig in more. Browser support at this point is actually very, very good. There's no reason why you shouldn't be using this in your projects, so get to it.